So the recording has now begun. With all of your permission, I think then we can be able to share the information on the slides and on the website. So a little bit about the Global EBA Fund. What is it? The Global EBA Fund is a catalytic mechanism that was set up to support innovative approaches to ecosystem-based adaptation, as we all work together to try and adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. So helping people, helping the environment. This fund is financed by ICIS, the International Climate Initiative of Germany, and is implemented by two organizations, UNEP and IUCN. My colleagues from IUCN have joined us on this call and will be speaking to you shortly. The fund was launched in 2021, in March 2021, and will be running until June of 2028. We hope to have about 100 projects in the portfolio by the time we finish, and hopefully we'll have more along the way. But currently, the fund is set to be implemented until 2028. So why was this fund set up? As I did mention, the fund is a catalytic mechanism. Why was it set up? In order to identify and support innovative approaches, innovative interventions, innovative tools that people have out there utilizing the ecosystem-based adaptation in order to increase or to respond to issues related to climate change and build resilience. The fund also aims to overcome barriers to scaling up EBA. These barriers are a range of them, and they range from issues to do with knowledge, issues to do with policy and governance, issues to do with financing, as well as private sector mainstreaming, amongst others. But just in order for all of us, I think, to read from the same page, this EBA, what do we term as EBA? The fund uses the CBD definition of what EBA is, which in verbatim, just reading from this, is the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of an overall adaptation strategy to help people to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. My colleague Wendy will take you through this. It breaks it down a little bit more when it comes to the criteria that we use to understand and define what is EBA. Back in 2022, UNEP undertook an in-depth analysis on the various barriers towards actually achieving EBA or to mainstreaming EBA. This report that you can see on your screens there, Harnessing Nature to Build Climate Resilience, is available in English, but we do have an executive summary that's available in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. So feel free to access this document. We will drop a link to it in the chat box shortly. So some of the things that were identified in this report with regards to barriers, there were barriers that largely were related to lack of awareness, and related to this as well is just insufficient knowledge and information about how to scale up EBA. So we do have knowledge on what EBA interventions might be, but the question is how to scale this up. Other issues were related to actual capacity, both technical, institutional capacity, as well as support in terms of governance challenges, insufficient support from both private sector as well as public and political support around that. Further, I think finance challenges have been mentioned over and over and captured in this report. And lastly, on your screens, you can see the limited space for ecosystem-based adaptation. I'd like to encourage you to have a look at the report that was produced. The executive summary really provides a good highlight of everything that the massive report captures. And for your access, I will drop a link to the 3 different language executive summaries for your access. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Catherine, who is going to take you through the next section. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Nora, and hello, everyone. My name is Catherine, and I work for the climate change team at the IUCN. So now that we know what EBA is and the general purpose of the fund, let's focus on these strategic objectives. Overall, the fund's strategic objectives define the overarching aim and direction of the projects. We are asking all applicants who are submitting their proposals to the fund to identify a maximum of 1 strategic objective that their project falls under. You can see here that there are 3 objectives on the screen, and I'll go into more detail about each. The first one, strategic objective 1, is focusing on building awareness and understanding of the critical role of natural assets in underpinning resilience. It focuses on expanding the knowledge and evidence base to help make the case for working with people and nature. And it also aims to enhance institutional capacities for mainstreaming EbA into national plans and policy frameworks. Strategic Objective 2 is focusing on addressing planning and other governance gaps in policy and regulatory environments to increase the attractiveness and feasibility of using and upscaling ecosystem-based approaches for climate change adaptation. And last but not least, Strategic Objective 3 that focuses on access to finance. It aims to expand access to sustainable short and long-term finance mechanisms for applying and scaling up ecosystem-based approaches for climate change adaptation. Next slide, please. The fund's pillars define how these objectives of creating an enabling environment for EbA can be reached within the scope of the fund. So please note that we ask that applicants select a maximum of 2 of the 3 action pillars that the project contributes to. You will see on the screen that there are also 3 pillars: levers for catalytic change, functional data and science, and innovation for adaptation. And I'll go through each of them with a bit more detail. Under Pillar 1, levers for catalytic change, here we need to start with some definitions of what we mean by catalytic interventions and levers for change. So within the scope of the fund, a catalytic intervention is defined as a targeted intervention that leads to a transformative shift at a systemic level at either global, regional, national, or subnational scale. And within that, a lever for change is defined as an area of work that has the potential to deliver wide-ranging positive change beyond its immediate focus. Examples that would be defined as levers of catalytic change could be seen here on the screen. Projects within this pillar could focus on policy and policy instruments, such as supporting the inclusion and mainstreaming of EbA into national, subnational, and sectoral policies, as well as inclusion of EbA into NDCs, NAPs, and related policy frameworks. Projects can also focus on inclusion of EbA considerations in payment for ecosystem services, using building codes and zoning regulations to support EbA, and so on. The next lever is education, capacity building, and skills development. Here, projects can focus on inclusion of EbA into the curricula of formal, informal, technical, and vocational education and training, as well as capacity building activities that target groups of practitioners that are directly involved in shaping policy and practice, such as extension workers, agriculturalists, city planners, public servants, and others. Under financing, projects can focus on developing innovative financing mechanisms and incentivizing public-private partnerships, and so on. And last but not least, another lever is working through the value chain perspective of a sector or commodity to identify entry points for change and ensure the adoption of EbA, diversify business models, and incentivize private sector collaboration. Some of the examples of activities that projects could focus on here are working with a food processing company that changes its business model to collaborate with producers who adopt ecosystem-sensitive practices, or to work on developing a new eco-label or improving an existing eco-label that includes criteria on EbA considerations, or even with trade or farmer associations that promote EbA considerations to its members. Field implementation to support this work could be considered under this pillar when clearly justified, such as contributing to a broader objective like policy influencing. Moving on to Pillar 2, functional data and science. Here, the work involves taking a data or science-driven approach to promote EbA action. It may involve extracting information and insights from data to make a case for mainstreaming EbA and to inform decision-making. Some examples of activities that can be considered here include, but are not limited to, undertaking climate risk and vulnerability assessments, including considerations on One Health, developing future scenario modeling, undertaking cost-benefit and multi-criteria analysis, job generation potential, and traditional knowledge and technologies. Of course, here, field implementation to support this work may also be considered under this pillar, again, when clearly justified. It is important to note that projects under this pillar are also requested to develop means or operational plans for the application, use, and adoption of the information and knowledge to be generated in order to influence decision-making and prompt EbA action. So how the knowledge produced through this pillar will then be used in decision-making. Lastly, Pillar 3, Innovation for Adaptation. Within the scope of the fund, innovative projects on EbA are defined as the ones that are yet to be proven, are at the initial stages of development, or are yet to be tested in a different context. And this can take the shape of an approach, a process, a practical tool, or an application. Some of the examples that can be considered under this pillar could focus on developing unconventional partnerships, supporting the integration of EbA in novel sectors, developing an innovative tool for EbA implementation, or a strategic pilot demonstration, specifically where high potential exists for upscaling through multilateral funds. Field implementation to pilot an innovative approach is allowed, and it also needs to be clearly justified. And to recap, please identify one main strategic objective that your project contributes to, as well as to identify a maximum of 2 pillars that your project falls under. Next slide, please. Thank you. While the objectives and pillars focus more on the thematic scope of what we fund, this will take a look at more of the operational level criteria. So with that, the Global EbA looks for projects that are catalytic and innovative, helping to create an enabling environment for people to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change through the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services. In terms of amount, requested funding should be between $50,000 and $250,000 US, with a maximum of $500,000 with clear justification provided. The fund encourages project durations of 24 months. However, this duration could be extended up to 36 months, again with adequate justification. The scale of projects may range from global, thematic, national, or subnational, targeted at ODA eligible countries. Please do note that if it is global and not targeted to any one specific country, then it's not required to be ODA eligible. And finally, it must contribute to an enabling environment for the implementation of EbA, aligning with the FEBA EbA qualification criteria and quality standards. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague Wendy to define what those criteria and standards look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, good afternoon. Don't know if anybody's joining us in the evening. Good evening. My name is Wendy Etienne. I work within IUCN's climate change team and as part of the Secretariat of the Global EbA Fund. I'm happy to be here with you all today just to talk about EbA, the EbA Fund as well, and to learn from you and to hear your questions. So as a reminder, you can post your questions in the Q&A section, and they will be answered in the Q&A session after the presentation, and could also be typed. The responses may also come in writing from one of us. So as Catherine mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the EbA qualification criteria and quality standards, and to build on the introduction and the definition rather that Nora shared with us at the beginning, is that EbA, as defined by the Convention on Biological Diversity, is the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of an overall adaptation strategy to help people adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so when we're thinking about that, there are 3 elements, overall elements of EbA. And element A is that it helps people adapt to climate change. Element B is that EbA makes active use of biodiversity and ecosystem services. And element C is that it is part of an overall adaptation strategy, that EbA is not standalone initiative. Going into the specific criteria under these elements, we have 5. And so in the previous slide, Catherine said that, the projects have to show that they're contributing to an enabling environment for EbA criteria. And I will speak more about that once I present the criteria, but just to keep that in mind that all proposed projects must demonstrate how they are contributing to all of these five. So criterion 1 is that EbA reduces social and environmental vulnerabilities in the context of climate change. So again, you're talking about people and nature. Criterion 2, EbA generates societal benefits. What are the additional benefits that your EbA initiative can generate as part of its implementation? And within that, and within the question of benefits is, of course, then who benefits, who loses, right? Questions about trade-offs, who gets, what are the long-term and short-term benefits? How are those distributed? How are you also including diverse groups of people as part of that process? Yes. And then criterion 3, EbA restores, maintains, and improves ecosystem health. This is very central to the approach, is that as you're implementing EbA, you're using biodiversity and ecosystem services to help people adapt. So how are you demonstrating biodiversity net gain as part of your project? How are you demonstrating active use of ecosystem services as part of your proposed project? Criterion 4 is that EbA is supported by policies at multiple levels. And so we're talking at the local, subnational, national, regional, and global levels. How are you demonstrating that your project exists within a particular context, right? What are the climate change policies that support the work? What are the biodiversity policies that support the work that you're doing? And even going beyond that as well, looking at what are some of the social policies supporting the work. So thinking about gender as well, thinking about development policies, financial and economic policies, how are they contributing to the success of your project? And with this, it's important to stress that it's not just how your project is supported, but you can also think about how your project contributes to these policies. So if, as an example, that country X is developing a new gender strategy, what role does EbA play in achieving that and contributing to the gender strategy? So can your project work to influence this process as well? So really thinking about that as well as the connections between different policies. For criterion 5, EbA supports equitable governance and enhances capacities. So really looking at who makes the decisions and how are they empowered to make the decision. So this is looking at governance in terms of laws and how they are made, but also in terms of participation. And then enhancing capacity is that, how are the target groups, how are the beneficiaries going to learn from this process, and how are we also learning from that? And so, as I mentioned, that EbA qualification criteria, so the project has to demonstrate how it's contributing to these criteria. So one of the things, of course, is that we are de-emphasizing field implementation, but if it's working at a capacity building level, if it's functional data and science, or if it's policy influencing, you also need to demonstrate to us as part of your application how effective capacity building is going to contribute to the restoration, maintaining and improving of ecosystem health, right? If the project is working within a policy landscape, how do you demonstrate connections back to criterion 2 on generating societal benefits? So really, one of the questions that we've gotten in previous webinars is how many of these criteria must a project meet? And the answer is all of them. So you have to demonstrate and articulate how your project meets these 5 criteria. To take a step back about EbA, we're talking about ecosystem-based adaptation. There is, of course, mitigation. The EbA fund looks as a primary objective for projects that are working at adaptation, which is helping people adapt to present and future impacts, those that are already existing, as opposed to mitigation, which looks to either reduce greenhouse gas emissions or increase the number of ways for those greenhouse gas emissions to be absorbed, to be sequestered, right? So what the EbA fund is looking for is projects that are helping people adapt to existing or future impacts, in which case you need to define what are the specific climate change impacts that your project is going to contribute to. Mitigation can be a co-benefit, but it is not the primary objective. So that's one of the reminders. A second thing, of course, then is to think about when we're talking about EBA, we're talking about people, we're talking about ecosystems, and we're talking about climate, and the need to balance these three elements. So one of the things that we see sometimes is that you get proposals that are coming very much from a conservation perspective and really emphasizing that the ecosystems piece and climate adaptation can kind of be incidental to improved ecosystem health. What we want to see is that it is the primary goal, that the ecosystem health links very directly to specific climate impacts and how people are going to benefit. Conversely, we can talk about increasing the resilience of people through diversifying their livelihoods, increasing their sources of income, and all of these kinds of ways. But if the ecosystem piece is missing, for example, that people are going to benefit by selling X, Y, Z natural commodity, but that is not linked to how then the ecosystem health is going to improve and how that ecosystem health also links to adapting to climate change, that is not considered an EBA project. So really thinking about the questions of how do the ecosystems play a role, how are people involved, and what are the specific climate impacts we're addressing is a very important part of the overall proposed project that we would like to see. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Yulia.
Thank you very much, Wendy. My name is Yulia. I'm a part of the Fund Secretariat from the IUCN side, from the climate change team. Thank you all very much for joining. Please use the Q&A option to share any questions that you might have. And we will either reply to you in writing, or we'll also use that opportunity to answer any of the questions in the Q&A part of this webinar. So I'll talk you through the recipients of the fund and some of the application process steps that we have. So here on the screen, you can see the overview of who can be the recipients of the fund. So first of all, we are trying to focus on the organizations that are well-grounded in the proposed area of work and have the experience with the size and the type of project that they're proposing. The applicants that are inclusive of local communities, indigenous knowledge and gender perspective, and partners that partner with local organizations if they are not one, because we also, of course, receive and very, very encourage applications from local communities, local NGOs, and so on. So if you are an organization that has a project in mind that is not based in the location of your project, in the country of your project, we really, really encourage you to partner with local organizations to also strengthen their capacity on different aspects around EBA or project management, for example. So all of the applicants need to be legally recognized entities, and they can be local NGOs, international NGOs, community-based organizations. They can be think tanks or academic institutions, research organizations. They can also be private companies. The fund is open to private sector organizations. One thing to note here is that governments at any level are excluded from receiving the funds from the Global EBA Fund, and this is a requirement of the donor of the fund, International Climate Initiative. So this unfortunately cannot be waived, and UNEP or IUCN offices at any level in any country are also not eligible to receive funding. However, when it comes to government agencies, we really, really encourage partnerships with those and to include them in the project, in the consortia. The only limitation is that they cannot receive funding directly from the Global EBA Fund. Projects can have a consortia, so you would always need to have a lead applicant, so an agency that submits the proposal, that receives the funds, distributes the funds between the consortium members that are undertaking certain activities. And this lead entity would need to also fulfill due diligence requirements that I'll touch base a bit on the next slide. But consortia is not a requirement. However, especially in the situations where the organization is proposing a project where they don't have, in a country where they don't have presence, as I've mentioned before, in this case, we're really encouraged to partner with local institutions and local organizations. So it can be, the proposal can come from one organization, it can also come from a consortia, as long as in the case of the consortia, the lead applicant fulfills all the due diligence requirement and has the capacity to manage the funds that are being given for this project. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some of you that may know the fund already know that previously we had a specific application process where we would request the applicants to submit all the documentation via email. As of last year, as of August last year, we have changed our processes and we have developed an online platform. So all the applications are now done through the online platform. You can see the link on the screen. It's also available on our website and we can share it in the chat as well. In addition, on our website, you can see you can find all the templates that you can use to collaboratively develop your proposal in advance and then just copy paste basically everything in the online version of these templates. Please pay special attention to the 3 sections that compose the application, the full application. These 3 sections you can see on the screen. They're marked by little green ticks there. First section is eligibility screening, and there is a number of questions that you would need to answer there. Second section is due diligence and financial capacity questionnaire, where the lead organization would need to attach different documents as well as audited reports that show their capacity to manage the funds and show that they have proper financial and administrative procedures in place to manage the funds. And the last section is application form, which is basically the main body of your proposal. It includes general objectives, some background information, the logical framework, detailed activity table, as well as the budget. The only thing for the budget is that it needs to be attached. You would need to develop an Excel and a budget in the Excel sheet, and you would need to attach it in your application form. On how to apply page of our website, all this information is also provided, and all the templates that you would see in the online platform are also available in the Word format for you to use to develop the proposal before inputting all the information in the online platform. When you use the online platform, please know that you can save your application before submitting. You can also share your application with other colleagues that you are collaborating with, and they can also input the information in the section that's more relevant for them. So this is very possible, and you don't need to necessarily submit right away. You can start your application, save it, and then submit by the deadline. Next slide, please. So some of you also that know the fund might know that as of early last year, we have introduced 2 funding tracks. There's a general EbA project proposal track, which is open to any projects that are catalytic and innovative projects that support the creation of enabling environment for the mainstream of EbA. And there is also a thematic track. Thematic track changes with each cohort, with each call that we open. So the call that is currently open with the deadline on the 21st of April, here the thematic track is focused on greening infrastructure and is basically dedicating to overcoming barriers and creating enabling environment for the uptake of green and green-gray approaches to infrastructure planning, investment, implementation, and monitoring to enhance the resilience and adaptive capacity of communities exposed to climate risk. So for the call that is currently open until the 21st of April, these 2 funding tracks apply: the general one that is open for any kind of projects, and the thematic one open for the projects specifically focusing on greening infrastructure through EbA. In addition, for this call that is currently open, the 7th call that we have until the 21st of April 2024, our steering committee have decided to give priority to projects focusing on small island developing states, so on SIDS, because of their extreme vulnerability to the impacts of climate change and also to the lack of projects that are currently supported by the fund in these countries. So while priority is going to be given to projects coming from small island development states, the focus is still also, of course, on the quality of the proposal. So if we have a project that doesn't comply with all the requirements of the fund that we've been going through in this webinar, just because they're coming from SIDS does not mean that they will be selected. So while the priority is on countries from small island developing states, it doesn't mean that you should not submit also other proposals that can be considered for the fund and that are good EbA proposals. We've had some questions before on what do we consider small island developing states, and we use the United Nations list of SIDS, so that you can also consult on our website. Next slide, please. So here you have a bit of a recap of what kind of questions you can ask yourself and the consortia that you work with, if you do, whether you should apply for the Global EBA Fund or not. So basically a couple of the questions, the overview you see on the screen. So first you would need to, of course, consider whether your project actually qualifies as ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change project. And here you would reflect on the criteria that my colleague Wendy was talking about previously in this webinar. You would also question whether your project has a catalytic and innovative potential to create the enabling environment for EBA. As was earlier mentioned, the focus is specifically on the enabling environment, not on field implementation. So field implementation should not be the main focus of your projects. It should focus specifically on the enabling environment. And the action pillars that my colleague Catherine was describing before were specifically introduced to showcase what is it that we mean by enabling environment. So levers for catalytic change, actionable data and science, and innovation for adaptation all form this kind of overview of what is it that we mean by enabling environment and what should be the focus of your project. Another question is, of course, does my project fall under a maximum of one strategic objective and maximum of 2 action pillars of the fund? Is my project global, thematic, or regional? And if my project is focused on one or multiple countries, are these countries ODA eligible? Is my project up to 24 months? If I'm requesting for up to 36 months, can I provide a justification? The same goes for the funding that is being requested. So if I'm requesting more than 250,000 and up to 500,000, can I provide a justification for this request? Another question is around the lead applicant and partner organization. So are the lead applicant and partner organizations well-grounded in the proposed area of work? Do they have previous experience in the same type of projects? Are they inclusive of local communities, indigenous knowledge, and gender perspective? And an optional, of course, questions to consider is, does my project partner with local institutions and local organizations? And that is for the reason that I explained before. If you are an organization that is not present in the country where you would like to implement, we really strongly recommend to partner with local institutions. Is the lead applicant and partner organizations are the legally recognized entities? Partner organizations also should definitely be legally recognized entities. And does the lead applicant comply with due diligence requirements for the fund? So the requirements of due diligence only should be applicable to the lead applicant, but not to the partner organizations. Partner organizations just need to be legally recognized entities. So these are the things for you to kind of think about, to consider, to help you to have this checklist and see whether your project complies with the criteria and requirements of the Global EBA Fund. And the next slide will be the last one before we move on to the Q&A section. Thank you. So here we just came up with a couple of tips to develop your proposal based on the experience that we've had so far with the applications that we are receiving. So first one is very important, is please stay focused. You will see in the guidance documents that we have on the grants procedures manual, as well as in the templates that are provided, that you will be required to have only one main outcome for your project and to have a maximum of 4 outputs. However, we recommend to maybe focus on 2 and not to have too many activities per each output. And this is because sometimes we receive projects that, even though the amount of funding requested is not that much, they're trying to do hundreds of activities, lots of different outputs and outcomes. And this is something that we do not encourage. We want the project to be focused and very specific and clear on what it tries to achieve. So please focus on one main outcome, limited number of outputs, and explain clearly how these outputs will be achieved through the activities that you will outline in the detailed activity table. You will notice that in the online application form, the form is limited to this restriction. So one main outcome, maximum 4 outputs, and maximum 5 activities. So even if you do develop more, you won't be able to insert that in the online template. So please be focused. Please be very clear on what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve that with the amount of funding that you're requesting. Second tip is please be clear and concise. So stay on point, avoid lengthy sentences, use scientific references wherever they're available. So best latest available science, demonstrate the innovative and catalytic aspects of your project within the area that you would like to implement, within the field that you would like to implement. And last but not least, please follow the guidance that we have developed. The Grants Procedures Manual captures everything that you need to know. It has links to all the templates. It provides all the guidance that you need. So please go through that. Please go through the guidance of the budget. The budget template has a special tab that guides you through how the budget needs to be developed. So we really, really encourage you to please go through everything that has been developed to help you understand how to develop a proposal and what the fund is looking for. If there's anything that is not clear, you can always reach out to us, and the email you can see on the next slide, I believe. Next slide. Yeah, here you go. So you can always reach out to us. We will get back to you with any clarification or any questions that you might have. The one thing that we will not be able to do, and this also applies to this webinar, is provide feedback on specific project ideas, because the process of reviewing and the process of kind of evaluating the proposals is quite an extensive one. We use a lot of experts that support us in that, so we will not be able as a secretariat of the fund to provide any guidance on eligibility of specific idea, either in this webinar or in writing as well. Thank you very much, and I hand over to my colleague Nora for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you to Wendy and Catherine as well. I think I will stop sharing my screen now as we're going to move into the Q&A session. As encouraged, please drop your questions in the Q&A. I can see a few people have dropped the questions in the chat as well, but it'll be easier to flag in the Q&A section. So if you could please copy your questions into the Q&A. If not, I'll try and monitor both and direct your questions to either Wendy, Julia, or Catherine. So maybe we can get started. We'll stop the recording at this point so that we can move into the Q&A session. So please feel free to ask any questions.